If someone had told me that I'd fall in love with my best friend, the same best friend, who swears relationships are pointless and marriage is just a government scam, I would have fainted in disbelief. The air on the campus of Graston University was thick with the frenetic energy of freshman orientation, a potent cocktail of hope, anxiety, and cheap beer. For Ivy, it was a symphony of new beginnings. Every leaf on the ancient oak trees seemed to sparkle. Every brick of the ivy-clad buildings hummed with potential. She was a live wire of optimism, her sunshine yellow sundress a stark contrast to the muted nervous tones of the students milling around her. She believed with every fiber of her being in serendipity, in kindness, and in the magic of finding your people. Sloane, on the other hand, viewed the entire spectacle with the weary cynicism of a war correspondent, embedded in a nation of idiots. Leaned against the sun-warmed stone of the humanities building, she was a statue of disinterest in ripped black jeans and a faded band t-shirt. Her arms were crossed, her headphones, though silent, serving as a clear do not approach sign. She was there under duress, a condition of her scholarship, and she intended to endure it with minimal human interaction. Their worlds were on parallel tracks, destined never to meet, until they did. It started near the rickety wooden picnic tables someone had optimistically labeled the social mixer. Ivy, trying to be friendly, had complimented a girl named Tessa on her manicure. The conversation, fueled by Ivy's effervescent chatter, had somehow spiraled. Tessa's boyfriend, a broad-shouldered guy named Ethan, whose baseball cap seemed permanently fused to his head, took offense to Ivy's easy laughter, interpreting it as flirtation. "Think you're funny," he grunted, his voice low and laced with a false bravado that his friends, snickering behind him, seemed to amplify. Ivy's smile didn't falter, but it became strained at the edges. "Oh, I was just saying." "I know what you were saying," he interrupted, stepping closer. The space around them grew quiet, a bubble of tension forming amidst the campus buzz. "You come in here with your sunshine act, thinking you can talk to anyone's girl. It wasn't like that," Ivy said, her voice losing some of its light. She took a small step back, her heel bumping against the leg of a picnic table. The dismissive flick of Tessa's wrist was somehow more cutting than Ethan's posturing. This wasn't the friendly welcome she'd imagined. Ethan's friends closed ranks, forming a loose but effective wall. The comments became sharper, less veiled. "Maybe she needs to learn some manners." The laughter that followed was cold. Ivy felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up her neck. Her optimism felt naive and brittle under their scornful gazes. Across the quad, Sloane's eyes, the color of a stormy sky, narrowed. She had been watching the entire pathetic display, not out of concern, but out of boredom-fueled contempt. Another pack of primates establishing dominance, she thought, her lip curling. She had zero interest in playing hero. But then she saw the girl in the yellow dress. Not the fake smile, but the genuine distress in her eyes. A flicker of extinguished light that, for some inexplicable reason, grated on Sloane's nerves more than the bullies' voices. With a sigh that was pure exasperation, Sloane pushed off from the wall, her boots crunching on the gravel as she cut a direct path through the crowd. "You know," a voice dry and laced with sarcasm, cut through the tension like a blade. "For a guy so worried about someone talking to his girlfriend, you're putting on a pretty public show of being an insecure jackass." All heads turned. Ethan flushed an ugly red. "Who the hell are you? This is none of your business." Sloane didn't even look at him. Her gaze was fixed on Ivy, assessing before flicking back to Ethan with undisguised disdain. "You're making it everyone's business by being so loudly terrible at basic human decency. It's embarrassing to watch." She finally gave him a once-over. "The hat's not working. By the way, nothing is going to compensate for that personality." One of Ethan's friends made the mistake of taking a step toward Sloane. She turned her dead-eyed stare on him and he froze. She wasn't particularly tall, but she carried herself with an unnerving stillness. a promise of volatility that was far more intimidating than shouted threats. "The lady isn't interested," Sloane stated, her voice dropping, losing its sarcastic edge and becoming cold. "Hard fact. The show's over. Walk away." For heartbeat. It hung in the balance. Ethan puffed out his chest, but the fight had gone out of him under Sloane's unflinching glare. Muttering curses, he finally turned, shoving his way through his own friends, the group dispersing with a few last-week attempts at saving face. The bubble popped. The normal sounds of the campus rushed back in. Sloane pivoted to quit right then and there as she saw it. "Done? Wait." A small hand closed around her sleeve. She glanced down to find Ivy beaming up at her, eyes glistening with unshed relief and awed gratitude. The sunshine came back tenfold. "You were incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Ivy," she breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush of thanks. Sloane carefully yet firmly slipped her arm free of Ivy's hold. "Don't make a thing of it. Seriously. Ever." She started off. Ivy fell into step beside her, undeterred by the brush-off. "But I have to make a thing of it. You were like a superhero. You just showed up out of nowhere, all gruff and intimidating. And you absolutely vaporized them with your words." Sloane suppressed a groan. "Gruff and intimidating. Perfect. I'm not a superhero. I'm just someone who hates watching the same tired social Darwinism perform itself before lunch." She lengthened her stride. Ivy matched it, her shorter legs working double time. "Well, you're my superhero. You rescued me." Sloane halted abruptly and finally studied her properly. The girl glowed, her expression so open and earnest it was nearly physically painful to witness. Sloane, who built walls for a living, felt strangely exposed. "I didn't rescue you," she corrected, her tone softening despite itself into dry, weary sarcasm. "I simply applied a small irritant to a school of brainless blowfish until they deflated. You would have been fine. Now, don't you have some trust falls to go practice or something?" But Ivy was star-eyed, her savior narrative freshly cemented. She looked past the prickly words and the guarded stance. She recognized the act of protection, the center of something solid and unshakable beneath all the snark. Sloane had stepped into the fray for a stranger. To Ivy, that meant everything. From that instant on, Ivy decided Sloane was her person, her rescuer, her grumpy, magnetic, fascinating anchor in a chaotic new world. And as Sloane walked away, tossing one last exasperated glance over her shoulder at the stubborn blonde ray of sunshine tailing her, she had no idea her bleak, cynical universe had just been irrevocably, permanently cracked open. Part 2. Adhesive in armor. What started as a one-sided attachment forged in the heat of a campus showdown quickly hardened into the unshakable bedrock of both their lives. Ivy, true to her promise, stayed at Sloane's side with the persistence of a benevolent burr. She'd appear at Sloane's dorm door with 2 coffees. "I just had a feeling you'd need this." Somehow always predicting Sloane's obscure favorite blend, with exactly 3 splashes of oat milk. She'd haul Sloane to sad frat parties for the cultural experience, and Sloane would spend the night leaning on a sticky wall, scowling, only to end up unexpectedly snorting at Ivy's gloriously wrong commentary on the dancers. They became a campus staple, a portrait of contrast, the sun and the storm cloud, the bubbly and the brusque. Their bond took shape in the quiet, ordinary gaps between classes. They claimed a specific, worn-out armchair in the library's back corner, big enough for Sloane to curl into, and for Ivy to perch on the arm, her legs tucked beneath her. There, Sloane would grumble through philosophy, brow knotted in concentration, while Ivy sketched clothing ideas in the margins of her notebook. "It's a scam, you know," Sloane muttered one afternoon, not lifting her eyes from a dense bit on nihilism. "What is?" Ivy asked, pencil hovering over a flared sleeve. The entire economic machine around wedding dresses, a garment worn once for a ritual rooted in a flawed social contract marked up for 100%. Ivy laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made Sloane's mouth twitch against her will. She rolled her eyes but didn't disagree. Not even a little. That day. You think love is a flawed social contract. Love is a biochemical reaction designed to facilitate procreation. The institution of romance is a scam invented to sell diamonds, Hallmark cards, and apparently overpriced jewel. Sloane finally glanced up, her stormy eyes meeting Ivy's warm hazel ones. It's a tax bracket scam mostly. Ivy just smiled. A knowing, gentle thing. You don't really believe that. I believe in data. And the data on long-term marital satisfaction is abysmal. But Sloane's data didn't account for the way she'd subtly shift in the armchair to make more room for Ivy. It didn't account for the fact that she'd started buying two coffees herself by accident and would slide one across the table to Ivy without a word. Sloane's world, once a monochrome landscape of cynicism and self-reliance, began to soften at the edges, warmed by a persistent, brilliant light. She found herself looking forward to the sound of Ivy's knock on her door. She'd never had a friend who didn't eventually flinch away from her sharp edges. Ivy didn't flinch. She'd just pat the edge and say, "Ooh, spiky," and then wrap herself around it anyway. It was during their sophomore year that the shift began within Ivy. It was a subtle thing at first, a new layer of awareness. It happened during a movie night in Sloane's room. A horror film was on, and at a particularly loud jump scare, Ivy instinctively jumped and grabbed Sloane's arm. Instead of shrugging her off, Sloane's hand had come to rest absently over Ivy's, her thumb stroking a comforting, absent-minded pattern on her skin. The movie faded into a distant hum. All Ivy could feel was the rough texture of Sloane's fingertips against her wrist, the solid warmth of her arm, the way her own heart was hammering for a reason that had nothing to do with the movie. The contact lasted only a minute before Sloane retrieved her hand to grab her drink. But for Ivy, the world had tilted on its axis. The ache started there, a quiet, hungry thing. She began to notice the details. The way Sloane's serious expression would dissolve into a rare, breathtaking smile, reserved only for Ivy's dumbest jokes. The way she'd chew on the end of her pen when she was thinking, a strangely vulnerable habit. The protective way she'd walk on the traffic side of the sidewalk, her body a silent shield between Ivy and the world. Ivy's feelings, once simple gratitude and admiration, deepened into something terrifying and beautiful. She was in love with her best friend. The realization was a secret she carried with her everywhere, a sweet, heavy weight in her chest. She tried to test the waters once on a walk through the autumn crisp campus. "Don't you ever want it?" Ivy asked, kicking a pile of golden leaves. "Want what?" "A debilitating mortgage. A subscription to a lifetime of compromise." "Hard pass." "No, I mean someone to come home to share things with." Sloane snorted. "I share things with you, and you're far less annoying than a hypothetical romantic partner who would inevitably leave wet towels on the floor and expect me to care about their dreams." The words were meant to be a joke, a classic Sloane deflection. But to Ivy, they were a door slammed shut. Sloane's grumpy, pragmatic dismissal of romance wasn't just a personality quirk. It was a fundamental creed. She saw love as a transaction, a weakness, a scam. So Ivy buried her confession deep. She let the ache live inside her, soothed only by the very thing that caused it, Sloane's presence. She learned to live with the quiet pain of Sloane's arm, slung casually around her shoulders, of falling asleep next to her during a study session, of Sloane tucking a stray piece of hair behind Ivy's ear with a grumbled, "It was bothering me." She was the glue that held Sloane's armored world together, and Sloane was the armor that protected her own too soft heart. It was a perfect painful symmetry. Ivy clung to Sloane like sunshine warming stone, and though the stone would never admit it needed the warmth, it had begun irrevocably to bask in it. And all the while, Ivy's heart, full to bursting with a love she could never speak, beat a silent, hopeful, hopeless rhythm against the unyielding armor of her best friend. Part 3. The Dating Disaster. The ache of unrequited love, once a quiet companion, eventually grew into a roar that Ivy could no longer ignore. By the middle of their junior year, she made a decision, a practical and heartbreaking one. She would try to move on. If Sloane saw romance as a scam, then Ivy would find a legitimate investment. She would date. Her first foray was with Liam, a sweet, soft-spoken art history major from her 19th century literature seminar. He liked Keats, could discuss the symbolism of pre-Raphaelite paintings, and opened doors for her. He was, by all accounts, perfect on paper. Sloane was there, of course, lurking at a corner table in the Student Union Cafe where Ivy had agreed to meet Liam for coffee. She was coincidentally studying there, a textbook on geopolitical theory open and ignored before her, her gaze, a laser beam drilling into the back of Liam's skull. When Liam nervously reached across the table to touch Ivy's hand while discussing the tragic beauty of Laurel Dame Sansme, Sloane materialized at their table as if summoned by a dark ritual. "Ivy, your keys. You left them in my bag," Sloane said, her voice flat, dangling the cane between two fingers. It was a lie. Ivy's keys were in her own purse. "Oh, thanks, Sloane," Ivy said, flustered. "Liam, this is my best friend." Sloane, this is Liam." Liam offered a friendly smile. "Nice to meet you. We were just talking about Keats." Sloane's eyes flickered over him with cold clinical disdain. "The man who wrote, 'Beauty is truth. Truth beauty,' while coughing up a lung from tuberculosis. A fittingly naive epitaph for a dying romantic." She turned her deadpan stare back to Ivy. "Don't be late for our thing." There was no thing. Liam's smile wilted. The date never recovered from the chill Sloane left in her wake. "She's intense," Liam said carefully after she'd left. "She's just protective," Ivy explained, her own heart sinking. She spent the rest of the date trying to ignore the knot of guilt in her stomach, as if she'd betrayed Sloane simply by being there. The post-date debrief was a ritual of its own. Back in their dorm, Ivy would find Sloane pacing or aggressively cleaning something. So Sloane would ask, feigning nonchalance and failing spectacularly. "He was nice," Ivy would offer. "Nice?" Sloane would scoff as if the word itself were an insult. "Nice is what you call a bland cracker?" He was a sentient beige cardigan. "Nice isn't enough for you. You deserve a fucking symphony." Ivy not a dial tone. Ivy's chest tightened at the force of it. "Do you mean that?" She'd scream inside her mind. "Do you even hear yourself?" The second attempt was Julian, a smooth, self-assured biology grad student she met at a university fundraiser. Older, worldly, and not the sort to be cowed by a cranky best friend. Their first date unfolded in a dim off-campus wine bar. Sloane wasn't physically there. Ivy had made sure of that, but her shadow was. Every time Julian cracked a joke, Ivy heard Sloane's dry one-liners in her head. When he discussed his research, she caught herself measuring his zeal against Sloane's fierce, all-consuming intellect. He impressed her, but he wasn't Sloane. Things were fine until Julian, buoyed by a second glass of Cabernet, leaned in to kiss her goodnight outside her dorm. Ivy panicked, turning at the last instant so his mouth brushed her cheek. From the darkness by the bike racks, a voice split the night. "Is there a problem here?" Sloane stepped out, an avenging angel in a black leather jacket, hands shoved in her pockets, posture deceptively at ease. Her eyes, however, burned. Julian blinked, thrown. No, just saying good night to Ivy. Looked like she was saying no, thanks, pretty clearly. Sloane replied, voice low and dangerous. "A kiss on the cheek isn't a maybe, it's a no. Learn the difference before you meet a knee where it counts biologically." Julian edged back, palms up. "Ho, okay, easy. Ivy, I'll call you." But the moment was already ruined. Ivy burned with mortification, her cheeks on fire. "Sloane, what are you doing? Taking out the trash, Sloane said, her gaze still pinned to Julian's retreating back. The stench was getting unbearable. She finally looked at Ivy, and the mask of anger slipped for a heartbeat, revealing something raw and scared beneath. It vanished at once, replaced by the familiar scowl. He was too old for you anyway. Probably keeps another girlfriend in his petri dish. The third try was the breaking point. A well-meaning friend set up a double date with a guy named Derek. They hit a noisy, crowded pizza joint. Derek was loud, too, and his hands wandered. Her back, her arm, her knee under the table. Ivy shrank, uncomfortable. Sloane wasn't supposed to be there. She was meant to be at a study group across town. But fate or Sloane's nearly preternatural sense for Ivy in distress intervened. She walked in to grab a takeout order she'd apparently called in. One sweep of the room and she clocked everything. Ivy's rigid posture, Derek's possessive hand on her leg. Sloane's face went white, then flushed with a frightening fury. She crossed the floor in 3 long strides, and before Ivy could speak, Sloane's fingers clamped Derek's wrist, peeling it off Ivy's leg. You have exactly 3 seconds to explain why your hand is on her, Sloane growled, her voice shaking, with a rage so potent the whole booth went silent. Derek, in foolish bravado, tried to bluff. Who the hell are you? We're on a date. Mind your business. Sloane leaned in, their faces inches apart. I am the business and you're closed. You can stand up and walk out right now, or I make a scene you'll be recounting to your buddies in the air. Your move. The manager was already on his way over. Derek, seeing the genuine promise of violence in Sloane's eyes, stumbled out of the booth and fled. Sloane threw a 50 on the table for the manager without looking at him, grabbed Ivy's hand and pulled her out of the restaurant. Outside, Ivy was shaking. Sloane, you can't just, you almost got in a fight. He was a creep. Sloane spat, her own hands shaking now from adrenaline. His eyes were all over you. All men are idiots, Ivy. They see something bright and beautiful, and their only instinct is to grab it, to see if they can dim it. They don't deserve to even look at you. The words were a shield and a sword. They were also a prison. Ivy looked at her best friend, her protector, her torturer. Sloane's jaw was clenched, her chest heaving. She was more upset than Ivy was. The logic was inescapable. Sloane's extreme protectiveness was a testament to their powerful friendship. It was a love, surely, but a platonic, ferocious one. It was the only language Sloane knew. She interpreted the burning jealousy in Sloane's eyes as a fierce sisterly devotion. She convinced herself the hot rush of shame and longing she felt was gratitude. And so after every dating disaster, Ivy would return to her anchor. She'd curl up on Sloane's bed, smelling the familiar scent of her laundry detergent and old books, and let Sloane rant about the inadequacies of every man on the planet. She'd nod and agree, and her heart would break a little more because the only person she wanted was the one person, convinced that what she wanted was a scam. And the only thing worse than Sloane not wanting her was Sloane driving everyone else away for reasons Ivy desperately, painfully misinterpreted. Part 4. The Clingy Aftermath. The cycle was as predictable as it was agonizing. A failed date would conclude, often abruptly thanks to Sloane's intervention, and a seismic shift would occur in the bedrock of their friendship. The storm of Sloane's protective fury would subside, and in its wake, a strange, uncharacteristic calm would descend, a calm that was somehow more disorienting and devastating to Ivy than the anger. It was as if the perceived threat of another person sparked a primal possessiveness in Sloane, and once that threat was neutralized, she had to physically reassert her claim. She became clingy. The first time it happened, after the disaster with Derek, they were back in Sloane's dorm room. Ivy was sitting on the edge of the bed, nervously, picking at a thread on her comforter, the adrenaline of the evening still making her hands tremble. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have let him. Sloane, who had been pacing like a caged panther, stopped. She looked at Ivy. small and dejected on the bed, and something in her face softened, the hard edges dissolving into something achingly vulnerable. Without a word, she crossed the room and sat down, not beside her, but so close their thighs pressed together. Then she simply took Ivy's hand, lacing their fingers together. Her palm was warm and slightly calloused, a stark contrast to Ivy's soft skin. Ivy's breath hitched. Sloane never initiated hand-holding. It was a gesture she openly mocked as juvenile and inefficient for mobility. "Your hands are freezing," Sloane muttered, her voice gruff, as if stating a scientific fact. She began to chafe, Ivy's hand between both of her own, not meeting her eyes. "It's stupid to wear such thin jackets in this weather. It's impractical." It was a flimsy excuse. Ivy wasn't cold, but she didn't pull away. She let her hand be held, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was new. This was terrifying. This was everything she wanted. The clinginess evolved, becoming more brazen with each failed romantic endeavor. They'd be watching a movie on Sloane's laptop, sitting on the floor with their backs against the bed. There would be a comfortable foot of space between them. Then a character on screen would kiss someone, and Sloane would make a sound of disgust. Ooh, predictable. And then, as if propelled by the same impulse that caused her disdain, she would unravel herself from her seated position and simply lie down, dropping her head into Ivy's lap with a heavy sigh. Ivy would freeze. The sensation of Sloane's weight on her legs, the scent of her shampoo, something clean and sharp like mint and rain filling her senses. "What are you doing?" Ivy would ask, her voice barely a whisper. "My neck hurts. The floor is terrible. This is just more ergonomic," Sloane would grumble, already burrowing her face against Ivy's stomach, nuzzling into the soft wool of her sweater as if making a nest. Ivy's hands would hover in the air, uncertain, before she gently, so gently, let her fingers card through Sloane's dark, silky hair. Sloane would let out a soft, almost imperceptible hum of contentment, and the ache in Ivy's chest would swell, until she felt she might drown in it. The most dizzying escalation happened at a crowded party. Ivy had been talking to a nice, unassuming film student for about 10 minutes. It wasn't even a date. It was just a conversation. But it was enough. Sloane, who had been glowering from across the room, shouldered her way through the crowd. She didn't say a word to the film student. Instead, she walked directly up to Ivy, turned her back to the crowd, and looked down at her with an intensity that stole the air from Ivy's lungs. "I'm cold," Sloane announced, her voice low. "Okay," Ivy stammered. "Do you want to go?" "No." And with that, Sloane slid her hands around Ivy's waist, pulling her flush against her own body. She tucked her face into the curve of Ivy's neck, her nose cold against her skin, her breath a warm ghost against Ivy's collarbone. "You're warm. Just be still." The film student awkwardly melted away. The music pounded. People danced around them. But Ivy was trapped in a perfect paralyzing bubble. She could feel every line of Sloane's body against hers, the lean muscle of her arms, the beat of her heart thudding in time with her own. She tentatively brought her hands up to rest on Sloane's back, feeling the shift of her shoulder blades. Sloane made that sound again, that soft, satisfied hum, and held her tighter. The excuses were always so transparent, so perfectly. "Sloane, this chair is too far from the outlet. Move over." And she'd squeeze into Ivy's armchair, half on her lap. "Your hair was in my face. It's distracting." And she'd tuck Ivy's hair behind her ear, her fingertips lingering on the shell of her ear. "I'm testing a hypothesis on human body heat transfer." This before pulling a blanket over both of them on the couch and tangling their legs together. Ivy's mind became a battlefield. Logic, her faithful soldier, tried to hold the line. "This is just how she is. She's tactile with you because she trusts you. You're her person. It doesn't mean what you want it to mean. She thinks love is a scam. Remember, this is just friendship. An odd, intense L-shaped friendship." But her body, Her treacherous, yearning body believed a different truth. Every nerve ending came alive under Sloane's touch. Her skin burned where Sloane's hands had been long after she'd moved away. The smell of her lingered on Ivy's clothes, a haunting reminder. She'd lie awake at night, replaying the feeling of Sloane's head in her lap, the weight of her arm around her waist, the puff of her breath against her skin. She was caught in a beautiful tortuous paradox, the very thing that soothed her soul. Sloane's closeness was the very thing that ensured she could never ever move on. Each casual, intimate touch was a brick in the wall of her own prison, built by the one person she longed to set her free. She was drowning in a sea of mixed signals, gasping for air, all the while clinging to the very anchor that was pulling her under. Part 5. The breaking point. The air in Ivy's apartment was soft and still, heavy with a kind of comfortable silence that only exists between two people who know each other's rhythms by heart. Rain pattered gently against the window, pain a soothing percussion to the low hum of the refrigerator. They were curled up on opposite ends of Ivy's worn, plush sofa, a shared blanket thrown over their legs, a recent frequent development in Sloane's campaign of closeness. Another date had ended. This one hadn't even required Sloane's intervention. It had simply fizzled out over mediocre pasta dish and a conversation. That felt like pushing a boulder uphill. Ivy had come home, texted Sloane a single sad face emoji, and within 20 minutes, Sloane was at her door, a pint of Ivy's favorite mint chocolate chip ice cream in hand. No questions, just presence. On the TV, a deep-sea documentary washed the room in shifting blue shadows. Sloane was absorbed, one hand idly sketching bioluminescent fish in a notebook propped on her knee. Ivy was pretending to read, but her gaze kept drifting to Sloane's profile, to the way the faint light traced the determined line of her brow, the soft curve of her mouth when she concentrated. The ache inside her was alive tonight, a hollow, hungry space that neither ice cream nor documentaries nor Sloane's easy nearness could fill. It had been weeks of the same loop, a hopeful date, the predictable letdown, the retreat back to Sloane, and then this unbearable, beautiful, tortuous closeness. Each brush of Sloane's foot with hers beneath the blanket jolted her system. Every time Sloane shifted and her shoulder pressed Ivy's arm, Ivy had to summon all her will not to lean in and weep. Sloane paused her sketching, flexed her fingers, and reached for her water on the side table, slow, unhurried, lifting the glass with one hand while the other, as if of its own volition, found Ivy's where it rested on the cushion between them. Ivy held her breath. This was normal now, part of the new Clingy protocol. But Sloane didn't just hold on. Her thumb began tracing slow, absent-minded circles across Ivy's knuckles. Her gaze never left the screen, where a ghostly anglerfish drifted through black water. She was utterly focused, utterly unaware of the cataclysm that single, tender motion set off. Then it happened. Sloane lowered her glass, still watching the TV. She lifted Ivy's hand, turned it slightly, and without looking, without any change in expression, pressed her lips, soft and warm and devastatingly firm, to the back of Ivy's knuckles. A kiss, brief, dry, and entirely unthinking, as casual as a breath. To Sloane, it was nothing, a non-thought, an instinctive gesture of affection, no more significant than patting a dog. To Ivy, it was a star-going supernova. The sensation burned through her skin, carving a line straight to her core. It was the exquisite last straw, the sum of years of longing, of hundreds of small, hopelit moments she had gathered and guarded. This careless intimacy from the woman who called love a scam was the sharpest pain she had ever known. A small, broken sound escaped, half gasp, half sob. Sloane's head snapped around, her attention leaping from ocean depths to Ivy's face, her brow knit in confusion. What's wrong? Ivy yanked her hand back like she'd been burned, scrambling to the far end of the couch and wrapping the blanket around herself like armor. Her heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. "You have to stop," she blurted, her voice shaking, ragged with a pain she could no longer hold. Sloane's confusion sharpened into alarm. She sat up, setting the notebook aside. Stop. What? What did I do? The defensiveness in her voice shifted quickly into something else, heard a rare, unguarded flicker of it in her storm-gray eyes. Did I make you uncomfortable? The question came quiet, almost afraid. The idea that her touch might be unwelcome seemed to wound her. No, God. No, that's not it. Ivy choked out as tears welled and spilled. She folded her knees to her chest, making herself small. It's the opposite. Don't you see? You hold my hand. You pull me into your lap. You kiss my... She couldn't say it. You do all of that, and you think it's nothing. You think it's just friendship. But it's not nothing to me, Sloane. It's everything. Sloane went very still, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. I don't understand. You make it impossible. Ivy cried, the words ripping free from a place of long-buried ache. You make it impossible for me to get over you. The silence that followed was total, only the soft patter of rain and Ivy's frantic heartbeat. On the TV, the narrator calmly discussed the mating habits of octopuses, an absurdly ordinary soundtrack to the collapse of Ivy's world. Sloane stared, expression unreadable. The hurt lingered, but now it mingled with a dawning, terrifying comprehension. Get over me, she echoed, hollow. What are you talking about? There was no going back. The dam had burst. Ivy looked at her best friend, her savior, the love of her life, through a veil of tears. She took a shaky, shattered breath and spoke the truth that had been caged inside her for years. I'm in love with you, Sloane, she whispered, the confession hanging in the air between them, fragile and world-ending. I have been since college. The world froze. The air left the room. The rain stopped. Time itself seemed to stutter and halt. Sloane didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stared at Ivy, her eyes wide, her lips slightly parted. The documentary's blue light played over her face, illuminating the shock that had wiped every trace of sarcasm, every ounce of grumpy defiance clean away. She looked blank, stunned, as if Ivy had just spoken in a language she didn't understand, yet whose meaning had reverberated in her very bones. In the ringing silence that followed the confession, Ivy could only wait. Her future, her heart, her entire universe, balanced on the edge of a knife, waiting to see which way it would fall. Part 6. The first kiss. The silence after Ivy's confession stretched into an eternity. Thin and brittle as ice, Sloane remained frozen, a statue carved from shock and disbelief. Ivy watched, her heart a frantic, dying bird in her chest as 1,000 emotions flickered behind Sloane's eyes. Confusion, denial, fear, and something else. Something deep and primal that was rapidly burning through the rest. Then the ice cracked. A slow, wicked smirk curved Sloane's lips, a stark contrast to the wide-eyed shock of a moment before. It was a look Ivy had never seen, predatory, possessive, and utterly sure. The stunned void in her eyes was replaced by a dark, blazing heat. Then don't get over me, Sloane said, her voice a low, husky rasp that vibrated through the space between them, stripping away years of pretense in an instant. Before Ivy could process the words, Sloane moved. It wasn't a gentle lean-in. It was a claiming. She closed the distance between them in one fluid motion, her hands coming up to cradle Ivy's face, her thumbs brushing away the tear tracks on her cheeks with a shocking tenderness. Her eyes, dark and intense, held Ivy's captive. Get under me. And then Sloane's mouth was on hers. It was not a tentative question. It was an answer. It was a confession. It was a wildfire. The kiss was fierce and hungry, a dam breaking after years of restraint. Sloane's lips were insistent, moving against Ivy's with a desperation that stole the air from her lungs. A small broken sound of shock and relief escaped Ivy, swallowed instantly by Sloane's mouth. Her hands, which had been clenched into fists at her sides, came up to grip Sloane's shoulders, anchoring herself in the whirlwind. Sloane's tongue swept into her mouth, tasting of mint and the faint bitterness of coffee, and something uniquely intoxicatingly Sloane. It was a kiss that spoke of 1,000 suppressed glances, 100 protective gestures, 1,000,000 unspoken words. It was anger and fear, and a love so vast it had terrified its owner into silence. And now unleashed, it was breathtaking. Ivy kissed her back with equal fervor, all her longing, her heartache, her years of desperate love pouring into the meeting of their mouths. Her fingers tangled in the silky strands of Sloane's hair, pulling her closer, needing to erase any last inch of space between them. Sloane's hands grew bolder, more desperate. They slid from Ivy's face, down her neck, over her shoulders, mapping her body as if memorizing it. Then one hand slipped down under the hem of Ivy's soft sweater, slaying against the warm skin of her back. The other traveled lower, skating over her hip before sliding under the fabric of her skirt, to grasp the bare skin of her thigh. Ivy gasped against Sloane's mouth at the contact, her whole body arching into the touch. The feel of Sloane's calloused palm on her sensitive skin was electric, a jolt of pure sensation that short-circuited every rational thought. Sloane made a low, guttural sound of approval in her throat, her grip tightening, pulling Ivy's thigh over her own, pressing their bodies together from chest to hip. The years of repressed tension didn't just explode. They detonated, showering them in a shower of sparks that threatened to consume them both. Sloane. Ivy breathed, her voice ragged, when they finally broke apart for air, their foreheads resting together, breathing each other's air. My place. Sloane growled, her voice thick with desire. Now, it wasn't a request. It was a necessity. They stumbled out of Ivy's apartment, a tangle of grasping hands and feverish kisses, barely remembering to lock the door. The short walk to Sloane's building was a blur of street lights and rain-slicked pavement, punctuated by Sloane pushing Ivy against a brick wall in a shadowed alley, claiming her mouth again with a urgency that made Ivy's knees weak. They fell through the door of Sloane's studio apartment, a chaotic space of books, schematics, and organized clutter. Sloane kicked the door shut and locked it without breaking their kiss, walking Ivy backward until her legs hit the edge of the bed. Sloane pulled back then, her chest heaving, her eyes black with want. She looked at Ivy, flushed, breathless, her lips swollen from kisses, her hair a golden halo in the dim light, as if she was seeing her for the first time, as if she were the most breathtaking, terrifying, beautiful thing she had ever beheld. I've been such an idiot, Sloane whispered, her voice full of awe. Then she knelt. She gently urged Ivy to sit on the edge of the bed, and still on her knees, she carefully removed Ivy's shoes, then her socks, pressing a kiss to the arch of each foot. Her hands slid up Ivy's calves, pushing the skirt up her thighs as she went, her lips following the path of her hands in a trail of searing heat. She worried her. Sloane kissed every inch of skin she uncovered, as if making amends for every year of denial. She buried her face in the warmth of Ivy's stomach, her arms wrapping around her waist, holding her as if she were the only solid thing in the universe. She pushed the sweater up and over Ivy's head, and then her mouth was on the swell of her breasts above her lace bra, hissing her name like a prayer. Ivy, God Ivy. Her hands, always so clever and precise, made quick work of clasps and buttons. When they were both finally gloriously bare, Sloane laid Ivy back on the bed and covered her body with her own skin to skin, heartbeat to heartbeat. The feeling was so profoundly right. It brought a fresh wave of tears to Ivy's eyes. Sloane kissed them away. Don't cry, she murmured against her skin. I've got you. I'm here. I'm so sorry it took me so long to get here. Her mouth began a slow, tortuous, exquisite descent. She kissed the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, the sensitive spot between her breasts. She took a peaked nipple into her mouth, leaving it with her tongue until Ivy was writhing beneath her, her moans echoing in the quiet room. Sloane worried every scar, every freckle, every curve. as if committing Ivy's entire being to memory. When her mouth finally found the hot, aching center of her, Ivy cried out, her back arching off the bed. Sloane's hands held her hips down, her touch firm and sure as she licked and tasted and loved her with a focused intensity that shattered Ivy completely. For part 2, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell.